I'd like to call this meeting to order using the May 18th resolution for virtual meetings. Does anyone have any concerns or comments about the minutes from the last meeting?
I do.
Oh, you do? Well,
yes, I was listed as being present and I was not.
Oh, Kathy.
Yes.
That's right, Kathy, because you were only present during the policy committee meeting. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kathy, I got that corrected for the meetings, that the notes that are in the meeting handouts.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for letting me know.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to accept the minutes, please?
I move.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Does anyone object to accepting the minutes? Thank you very much. I'll begin the announcements with a big thank you to the Emergency Planning Committee that's been working so hard for the last 6 months to try to make our transitions in library service as smooth as they've been. I have to say that what I have heard about the opening of the branch libraries in the outlying jurisdictions has been really positive, and I really appreciate all of the work that the Emergency Planning Committee has done and is going to continue to do as we move through the rest of this year. So thank you. Thank you from the board. Are there any other announcements? Are there any public comments?
Sarah, do you want to check and see if anyone logged in wants to make comment?
Not seeing anything at the moment.
All right, we'll move on to the body of the meeting then. We are restarting our continuing education with Angela Critics and Haley Tompkins, who are going to be briefly presenting and also discussing with us, taking our questions, for a presentation they did for VLA last year about weeding, particularly in juvenile collections. I'll let you two start. I don't know who's going to be taking the ball here.
Can I say something really quickly first, Marcy?
Yes.
Just to as further way of introduction, Angela is the Children's Services Manager at the Jefferson Madison Regional Library, so she has the ultimate authority for selecting and deselecting children's materials. Haley is the Crozet Branch Manager, and initially I think was working with Angela on this as the chair of the Virginia Library Association's Intellectual Freedom Committee. And both of them have done an excellent job of this presentation. I think that the title of it was my title that I put in our CE pending about 9 months or so ago and never revisited. So I don't think it exactly meets what they're going to be talking about, which is more of an evaluation process. So I apologize if that was misleading there. I want to thank them both for their time and for agreeing to come and be the first post-COVID continuing education group.
Not quite post-COVID yet.
Well, good point, good point.
All right, I will go ahead and share my screen just to share this presentation. Can everybody see that?
No.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, sometimes it takes a minute. All right, so Angela's gonna be kicking us off. Before we start, I will also, whoops, I will just say that we will be presenting this on our annual All Staff in Service Day as well. So if you want the long form, it's going to be a short overview just because there is a lot here that we're going to try to get to as much of as we can. But we will go through this in more detail if you're interested in that. Will be recorded. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Angela, who will start us off. Is she unmuted?
Angela, are you muted?
She's still muted.
There we go. Sorry about that.
Start over.
Start over. So as Haley said, this is necessarily a very brief overview, and it was a 45-minute presentation at VLA, and we went long there. So what I'm hoping that you will take away from this presentation is the understanding that at JMRL, we don't, we can't, and we won't weed solely based on content. However, it is a known fact in the field that many children's books do contain racist and other stereotypes. The public is aware of this, and the challenges that we're seeing from the public in requests for reconsideration are no longer just targeting those books that represent marginalized communities. And it's become a very polarizing issue in the library community, with some children's staff coming out as, we can't have anything that promotes racism in the collection for children because we can't teach them that. And others saying, you can't remove any of this stuff because then you're censoring, you cannot look at anything just because the content's bad. And I realized that there needed to be something in the middle, that we needed to have a more nuanced understanding of how we balanced intellectual freedom with a diverse and inclusive collection. Ellie, the next slide, please. So this grew out of a request for reconsideration that came in just before Christmas of 2018. Merry Christmas. And it was for the Travels of Babar, which is the second book in the Babar series. Babar is a classic. Babar circulates well. The complaint was that it promotes colonialism, and there is a 2-page illustration in this book that really is a horrific racial stereotype. I will not show it. As a former art historian, I could spend 45 minutes unpacking everything that is wrong in that image. And so my immediate reaction was, yeah, this probably doesn't belong in the children's shelves, but I'm not comfortable just weeding it because that's not the answer either. And next slide, Haley. So what did I do? I reached out to Haley as the VLA Intellectual Freedom Committee Chair. I did research, I read reviews, I read analysis. I found that everybody who defended Babar against colonialism said, except this one book, which is horrible. A real champion of intellectual freedom in Canada said, yeah, I was prepared to argue for this until I saw that illustration. It doesn't belong in a children's collection. I consulted the ALA Office of Intellectual Freedom and the Association for Library Services for Children to try and get some professional guidance on what could I do. And the answer was to fall back on our collection development plan, which fortunately is excellent, thanks to Meredith, and to look at our reconsideration policy and procedures. And one of the parts of the collection management plan is that we refer to the CREW manual, which is continuous review, evaluation, and weeding. It is a standard in the field, and it is published by the Texas State Library Association. And the answer over and over and over again was provide more content, add more information. And that is something that we have tried to do. And the patron actually did not want the book removed. They wanted context added to it. And so that was what ended up happening. We looked at the CREW manual, which specifically, while it recommends that you can remove racist stereotype books and sexual books with sexist stereotypes, it also says that you can move them to the children's literature section of the adult nonfiction stacks. And that is what we chose to do, so that the book is still available to patrons. If they're placing a hold on all the Babar books in the catalog, they'll never even notice it's in a different location. If they do, they can ask, and it gives us an opportunity to provide that extra context. This is why it's here. You might want to be aware of this, but please check it out and share it with your child if that's what you choose to do. It is up to the parent to make that call. Haley. And so, as I said, the information is always go back to the collection management plan or the collection development plan. That is the key. That is what we rely on. Our collection management plan was last updated and in 2016 and is due to be revised currently in the new 5-year plan. It does refer to CREW for the deselection process, and it also lays out our process and procedure for reconsiderations. And that policy for reconsideration was revised in 2018. And I will say that has been a lifesaver in terms of the requests I've gotten since then. This is the rock, this is what we follow, and this is essential, and it does reflect our mission statement and values. Next. The flip side of this is add extra information, build a diverse collection, add to the collection, add more representation. And so these are some of the tools that I use when I'm looking at building a diverse collection. Own voices refers to when a member of a marginalized community writes about their own experiences within that community, as opposed to if I tried to write a book about the experience of a child living with deafness. I have no background in that. I have no understanding. I have no connection with that community. And so that's one thing that I look for. I strive for representation, and that is some advice that I got from a First Amendment scholar at ALA in 2019. And really, we're not going to get balanced because there just aren't enough books published to make it balanced and equal, but to actually make sure we try to represent all aspects of our community. And then some of you may have heard this, the likeness of books to mirrors and windows for children. And I'd like to take that a step farther. Books are mirrors, and marginalized children need to see themselves in the books that are on our shelves. But books also provide windows to another experience for children who are the mainstream, who are the default, and who are used to only seeing themselves. This lets them see there's somebody else out there. And the sliding glass door gives them an opening into experiencing what somebody else experiences. And this graphic just really talks about the different ways that children's literature can really build empathy and awareness and help make our entire community more inclusive. One of the things that, as I'm building a diverse collection, that I chose to do was a diversity audit. Yeah, next slide, please, Haley. That means handling every single book on the shelf and looking at things like the gender of the author, the gender of the main character. Are there Black or African American characters, Latinx characters, Native, Asian? And you choose the categories you're looking for. And in terms of religion, it was non-Christian religious representations to include Islam and Judaism. I didn't do every book in the collection. I did the children's fiction, the J fiction, just authors whose names began with A and D, and it took me well over 2 weeks. And it is just a snapshot of the collection. At one point in time, over 1.5 years ago, this is what was on our shelves. This is not static. Things have changed since then, but it gives me a snapshot of where things are and where I need to get from there. So next, hi, Haley. And for those who like numbers, here is the result of the diversity audit. I handled 594 books, and this is the breakdown, which doesn't quite match, the percentages of our population, but it's not as bad as it could be. I will say that of the 5 books with Native characters, 4 of those were probably all one author who happens to be a member of the Abenaki Nation. And that was just chance that his books were in there, and that falls into the Own Voices category as well. I have all the records if anybody wants to dig deeper into this, but again, it was 1.5 years ago, so things have changed. Next.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the deselection process. We also call it weeding. We take a lot of considerations into this evaluation of the collection, and it starts out usually by shelf space, I would say. So that's where we're starting out in Crozet, is we look at spaces that we are overflowing, and right now is especially hard in COVID. And we use the crew guidelines, especially for our starting out. So we have an acronym called MUSTY, and we decide whether or not the book falls into one of these categories before it goes or before it stays. So MUSTY stands for something that is misleading, that's factually inaccurate, like is Pluto a planet? No, it's not. So that would be an outdated, misleading book on outer space. Is it ugly? Is it falling apart? Is it old and just in poor condition? Is it superseded, meaning there's another edition that's more up to date that's available? Is it trivial? It's just something that was published, you know, like something about celebrities that's like 10 years old is probably not going to be relevant. It's a bit on the trivial side. Is it irrelevant to the community we serve? So if it's, you know, a cookbook on a small town from Maine, and that's not our community, that's something that might be considered irrelevant to our community. Or is it elsewhere? Is it easily obtainable from another library like the UVA library, which is so close by? Or somewhere else that we could get maybe an interlibrary loan from. We also look at whether or not it is a classic. So we have a core collection that's actually published that we often refer to if we are not sure if it's something that should be kept. We aren't going to know all of the classics by heart, so we also consult with all of our, with other people. A lot of times I deal mostly with the adult collection at the Crozet Library. I consult with Meredith a lot if I'm not sure whether or not to keep something. I also will say that if something is elsewhere in our collection at JMRL as a whole, a lot of times Central is kind of the holder of a lot of things, especially for adult nonfiction, because they have more space than many other places. And does it circulate well? We have, especially since Meredith has taken over kind of standardizing our weeding process, she has, at least on the adult side, she sends out Cirque stats and gives us ideas of what is a good Cirque stat at the library that we're in versus what's maybe not. So that helps us determine whether or not something might stay just based on like how well it circulates for the type of book that it is and where it is in our collection. And we always keep in mind that we read books based on all of our patrons' needs and not just on our own moral principles. That's never a consideration. It always fits into one of these categories. From the Crew Method, it says, read books that reflect racial and gender bias. Consider moving classics that may be used by children's literature classes to the adult 800. So that's what Angela was talking about when we were considering how to add context or where to put Babar and other things like that.
And I will say that we use that extremely cautiously. In the last 2 years, I believe we've moved a grand total of 2 books, one of which is Babar. So again, it's not something that we want to do because we don't label books either.
Exactly.
If it's falling apart and it's not circulating, it's not serving our community's need. And there are other things that we could have on the shelf. And those are our priorities in weeding.
Yeah. Angela?
Okay, as I mentioned before, we've got a very clear and up-to-date policy and procedure for reconsiderations. It is absolutely wonderful to use when writing a response to a request for reconsideration. And since Babar, I've had 2 more related to books that they were concerned about the racist and dated content in them. It's super, super important, not only that we have this, but that frontline staff are aware of it and trained on how to do this so that they're not tempted to engage with the patron who comes in to complain or who calls to complain. And so I know David touches on this in the new staff orientation. We will bring this up again at in-service when we have this presentation. But it's really, really important that the frontline staff are listening and making sure the patron feels heard and respected, offers the reconsideration form, informs them what the process is, what they can expect, and lets their supervisor or manager know, and then leaves the response to us. And it's really important that they all are aware of what that procedure is. And again, we try to err on providing context rather than removing content. And that is the ALA guidelines and the response that I have gotten from them.
Yeah. And I will also say that as a manager who has gotten complaints about books on display that a patron didn't like, most of the time they do just want to be heard, and that's super important to hear them out and to hear their complaints and then to gently explain to them why that book might be there in general. And I have gotten a lot of good conversations out of that with patrons, and they have decided not to submit an official reconsideration form in most of those instances. So in terms of adding context, and this is Banned Books Week, so this is a good time to talk about context. We are big fans of displays, and we try to let our staff know, and we think it's very important to make sure that every space is a chance to display diverse books. So if books are just on display in a general way, like on top of, on the top row of an unused bookshelf, if that's a thing, on table spaces, etc., it's important to remember to balance those with reads for everyone, so that anybody that walks into your library can see themselves reflected in at least some way in those spaces. And also displays on specific topics, on diversity, on, Banned Books Week is usually, when we have displays available, is usually a really big thing for libraries to talk about. And it's a good chance to call books out for, like, or to talk about intellectual freedom and why it's important. But also displays are a great way to highlight books that people might not find otherwise in our collection. Also, book lists and programming are other ways to highlight diverse topics that people might not otherwise find. Doing reader's advisory and recommending books to somebody based on just like a good story, and hopefully finding a good book that is also diverse, that you can kind of guide somebody to that they might not have found otherwise. And shelf talkers. So if you say, that's an example of, if you have something in one section and say you might also enjoy these types of titles, that would be a shelf talker. It's just like a little sign in the stacks that say, if you liked this, you might like this other thing.
And that's a way to do things like take from, children love Laura Ingalls Wilder. And, my daughter, that was what got her into reading at a very young age. But it is a presentation of its time, and it has the problems of attitudes of its time. And so when we hear that someone really likes the Little House books, I'll turn around and offer them The Birchbark House by Louise Erdrich, which provides the exact opposite perspective, the native child who was forced out of her home by the westward expansion. But in order to have these work, we have to continually encourage staff to read diversely, because if you don't know these books are there, you can't recommend them to the patrons. And so that's something that we're always trying to encourage our staff to do.
Exactly. So just another note on intellectual freedom. We, as librarians, as library professionals, we have ethics and a responsibility to the communities that we serve, and that encompasses everybody in the communities that we serve. And we don't decide whether or not to weed something based on whether or not we like the content, or to buy something whether or not we like the content. It is based on our guidelines, and those are really important that we have those in place and stick to those. We also often have to remind people that the responsibility of what you read is up to you, or the parent of, that's more often the complaint, is that, I don't want my kid finding this. And we say that it is up to you to determine whether or not that is right for your child. It is not up to the librarians to decide what is right for you or for your child to read. And I've included the freedom to read statement here. JMRL supports the statements that you see on the right, the ALA Bill of Rights, the interpretation to the interpretations to the Bill of Rights, the ALA Freedom to Read statement, the ALA Free Access to Libraries for Minors, and the ALA Freedom to View statement. You can check those all out. This link leads you directly to our policy page that has those on it. And I won't bother you to read the Freedom to Read statement, because you can do that on your own. But this is a very important foundation of what we do and what we believe. So with that, we will bring us to our reflections and some questions from you guys. So
And
again, yep, go ahead.
go ahead. You were just going to, I'll bet, say that we will be presenting this on October 12th, that Insurance Day, and it will be recorded. And one thing that I like to keep in mind going forward is I spoke with Dr. Emily Knotts, who is an associate professor at the I School at the University of Illinois, and she is a First Amendment scholar. That is her field, and she is also a woman of color. And she said to me something that really struck me, and it's freedom of speech is not a progressive value, but we move away when we move away from it in an effort to combat hate speech. In the end, it's going to be those very marginalized voices that we're trying to protect that will ultimately be silenced. And she issues some very strong cautions about trying to handle and manage racist content, trust the parent. And then one of my favorite quotes that is my tagline in my email, so that I am constantly reminding myself, a truly great library contains something in it to offend everyone. And I know there are things in my collection that offend me. I don't like them. I buy them anyway because there are patrons who want them. And that's what it boils down to. We serve our patrons.
All right. I hope we have some time for questions.
Thank you very much. That was really helpful for you to condense it that way, and I hope that some of the board members will actually attend that session on October 12th. Are there any questions or comments from the board?
I have one in my own. I have a comment.
Go ahead.
Okay. One thing, again, thank you very much. I have two questions. One, just scheduling. Is the October 12th going to be virtual?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
our entire in-service day is going virtual this year.
Okay. And I would just like to point out, because we had a few questions prior to the presentation today, and I think one of the things that's quite clear from both of you is the necessity for librarians to have time to read. They can't recommend what they don't read, and especially as in both of your libraries are larger and larger collections and different types of collections. But even in spite of that, there's something that happens when when you're a manager of the children's department or the anybody in the library staff, when you're shelving and you're reading and reading reviews, you get very well acquainted with your collection, and it's hard for people to realize that. But the knowledge is great, but you can always have more, and it involves a lot of time dedicated to all of the criteria in selection, not just the management. And that's really important. And the other important thing, I think, is to remember that all of the ALA policies and regulations and all always point to the fact that the librarian, as a professional and someone who is in that environment, knows their patrons and their community better than anybody else, hopefully. And I have confidence that they're all professionals in that respect, that they also have connections that keep them tied to the community, whether it's for particular books or interests, or like you were talking about cookbooks, it could be something as simple as that. And that's really important, that we encourage stability and library staff and connections to the community, because that all, very importantly, I think, of course, this is all my opinion, contributes to that establishment of a collection that serves your library. But that's also a point that kind of gets lost when we have just the policy. This is what we do. This is, which is, of course, is important.
Yeah.
But so is the person.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Be true.
Haley, could I ask you to take off the screen share, please?
Absolutely, sure.
Thank you.
Sure.
Good. Does anyone else have any comments or questions for Haley and Angela?
Lisa?
everybody. Good afternoon. Hi, Angela. Hi, Haley. Thank you so much for this presentation. I very much appreciate it. I heard about it last year. I heard it was a roaring success. And so I want to congratulate you both in person. Two things come to mind. One, just a quick follow-up to what Wendy just mentioned. I think it would be nice if we could think about ways to build in compensation for staff to read. UVA has reading days, reading holidays, where students are supposed to read and study for exams. They usually don't, they usually go on an extra vacation. But I believe that if we could put in a couple paid holidays for library staff to read books, I think that would be very helpful for the reasons that you described. I too, Angela, was a kid who loved Little House on the Prairie. I read every one of those books when I was little, so much that my own mother banned me from them after the 8th time reading each one. She was like, girl, you've got to find more books to read. You know, this was in the 70s. I wasn't who I am right now. And because I am who I am right now, however, I do want to point out that I am concerned about drilling down more specifically. I feel like what you have created is this dichotomy between diverse books and not diverse books. And what that actually ends up centering is whiteness. It ends up centering whiteness and white people as the center and the default, and everybody who isn't white is then somehow different or diverse. And so I understand, of course, that there's a lot of offensive things in a library. Libraries themselves have been harmful to Black people. I don't know of JMRL's history with segregation, but I know that there were segregated libraries all throughout the South, where Black people were not allowed to check out books, et cetera, et cetera. So this notion, Wendy, I'm not sure I would historically, I think now, of course, I trust the librarians we have now, but I'm not sure I would say the same thing from 40 years ago.
Right.
And so I want to be clear that there's a difference, I think, between offensive material and things that are deliberately harmful to Black children. I think that at least in Charlottesville City, there should be a vested interest in paying attention to things that are reinforcing white supremacy as a norm. And that's something I would just urge us to think about. I'm not saying go out and throw Huck Finn on the bonfire, even though I hate that book. I absolutely do. And I'm a professor. I'm a professor of American and African American literature, and I hate that book. And yet I am right now on a team helping people learn to teach it apparently to children in ways that won't harm Black kids. It's not my favorite part of my job, but that's apparently something I am doing. But my point is to think carefully about when we think about offensive, it's not about being a political dilettante. This is about a 5-year-old Black kid grabbing Babar off the shelves.
And I couldn't have that.
And finding a toothpaste and them being seen as monkeys. Like, that is not okay. And so I just want us to be mindful of when we say diverse, at least in this context and for this community, I think thinking carefully about the stories we tell in our buildings. How does this go against our anti-racism policy? Like, there's lots of other things that are at work here. And I don't know Emily Knox, you know, but even this idea that a woman of color told me it was okay to do is not enough an endorsement. It seems like, yeah, you said what I'm saying? Like, I'm not trying to change.
I'm very conscious that I am a white woman coming in, and the last thing I want to do is be making calls about what's right for another community.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know I don't have the background to do that, and that's why I have tried to seek out resources and people who have a background in these issues. And what I took from Dr. Knox was to think carefully about how I do things. A lot of what I see, I wonder, we want to fix things. It's in our nature as librarians, and we want to make our collections better and serve our communities. And I want those children that I see come in to find themselves and make this be a safe space.
Absolutely.
But so I'm very conscious that I don't always know what makes that. And so I need to, and so thank you for your comments. I really appreciate your input as well.
I think it's great. I think you all are doing a really great job. I just wanted to think about, as we are currently, at least some of the work that I know that I've been doing to remove these racist Confederate statues, which people have tried to defend under First Amendment measures, right? And so I think, like, for Charlottesville City, the conversation is in the county as well, is incredibly pointed and loaded, when we start to look about what makes for a true and whole public and not just a segment of it.
I think
Thank
it's also important to consider that most of these things probably fall, like when we're talking about things that are musty, most of the items that we are weeding that may have problematic content often fall under many of those categories.
Yes.
So, so we're looking at that as a whole, and then also, again, providing context by taking it out of a section where a kid can just walk up to something and have no ability to provide that context for himself or herself. So I think that it's important that we also remind ourselves that there are usually a whole host of reasons that something can be weeded and needs to be weeded, and that we provide, on the flip side, good new materials that will take the place of those old ones so that they will eventually be weeded out on their own based on circulation as well. So yeah, that's really, really good points, and thank you.
Thank you both so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem.
So I have a couple follow-ups that are sort of along the lines of your last comments, Haley. And it's more about sort of the mechanics of weeding as a tool. And let me say first, I really appreciate throughout the presentation the commitment to intellectual freedom that was there. I do think that I think I agree with all the general principles that you articulated in terms of the library not being the arbitrator and that individuals have freedom and also responsibility for what they choose to access and read. But sort of mechanically speaking, Haley or Angela, but Haley, you just mentioned that a lot of these materials, so we can look at a material and say, yes, I think this is problematic in various ways. And that's a subjective, different people in our community are, maybe only a few, but different people will have different opinions about some of those things. You also mentioned, and I think this is true, that some of those that we might look at and say are problematic, or many of them, are going to be older and maybe fall under various objective criteria in terms of circulation. And so my question is, to what extent is the content-based being used as a criteria in our weeding or deselection policies currently? Can you characterize the number of books or how that's, I'm really interested in that piece of the puzzle, and I'll explain, I think you maybe know where I'm going, but I'll explain why, for the general discussion. But I want to understand that first, like what's really happening as far as the content-based component.
That would be hard to put a number on, just based on the fact that we are weeding, like when you do weeding, it's a process where you're taking every single book that you're picking up off of, your shelf, or in a lot of cases, it's a list of circulation numbers. That's what we base all of ours off of. And then we're looking at those other criteria from there. So again, they usually fall into so many different categories. Like if you're talking about it being content-based, it could just be that it's got outdated terminology or outdated like health information. And you can't keep a book on heart conditions that's 15 years old. It might be in great condition, but it's outdated and it's going to be misleading. It's not going to be what doctors recommend anymore. And the same thing is going to go with, something that might have some other problematic content like sexism, racism, ableism, etc. But it's usually following a bunch of other things. Like we also have books on the subject that are more up to date on a lot of things. I'm thinking probably more specifically on nonfiction at this point.
Kelly?
Yeah.
If I could jump in here.
Yeah.
Just as we flipped Sierra and our records, Cirque Records in July for the new fiscal year, I ran lists. And the lists are things that have not circulated in at least the last 2 years. Some of the things on this list, because I'm still 4 years on trying to work through a nonfiction collection that hadn't been weeded in over 20 years. Some hadn't gone out since 2002. And I look at it and I go, oh, wait, this is somebody, I'm doing folk tales. And I've got like 5 pages worth of folk tales. I went through about 45 of them last week, and they were not circing. They are in awful condition. And yes, some of them are probably colonialists who are presenting these stories of the place that's been colonized. But there are all these other things. And the reason they came to my attention was because they were not circing. And that was my starting point. And then I'm looking back and saying, is there a reason to keep this? If it's only been 2 years since it went out, there may be a reason to keep it. If it's not gone out in 10 years, it doesn't matter what the content is, it's coming off the shelf because I can put something new and better on. And I do not start from content. That is never a starting point, and it is never a single reason for removing something.
I think if I could just jump in, Mike, to put some perspective here, last year, over 50,000 items were weeded out of JMRL's collection. So it's a constant thing, which is shocking to a lot of members of the public when you talk about it. They don't think about that end of collection development, you know, but.
Well, if you're getting 50,000 new books, which I think we get a lot of new books.
Exactly.
Go somewhere.
So they have to go somewhere, right? So,
Yes.
So when we talk about this responsibility too, it is diffused. So Angela can make recommendations out to children's staff throughout the region. She'll say, look, I'm looking at this, I'm weeding this, you should take a look at it. Ultimately, every branch manager has the responsibility for their own collection, and they, in terms, delegate folks within that staff in order to weed and make decisions. The manager is the ultimate authority, but there are a lot of hands that touch these things. So, you know, the original question was about content-based weeding. And I think based on that presentation and all the documentation that Meredith would share in her training as well, the content is not one of the metrics that staff is using unless it falls under that question of the M, you know,
Right.
What was the first in Musty?
Misinformation.
It was, the information is incorrect or incomplete.
Right. So I want to follow up with one point and then maybe get a reaction response. And then I have one other separate question if we have time. But I just wanted to point out that, and again, I'm just talking about mechanics and some principles here. So I want to get kind of on the record that the ALA, Office of Intellectual Freedom, says that while weeding is essential to the collection development process, which we all agree with, weeding should not be used as a deselection tool for controversial materials. So again, that speaks to me that problematic content, to me, sounds like a very similar concept to controversial materials, that weeding wouldn't be the right tool according to the ALA guideline. And I want to kind of get that on the table. Secondly, our own weeding policy has a list of criteria. I won't read them all, but content is not one of them. They're more of those sort of objective age and Cirque-based type of criteria. And then that's actually reinforced again by the ALA that recommends that policy languages that reference weeding should highlight objective criteria. So I guess my question is, but I did see in the presentation reference to this third-party crew manual, which is not, it's in our collection development plan, I guess, and I'll be interested to look at that, but it's not part of policy itself. So my question would be, what would be, if we were to kind of take a sort of a strict interpretation of those ALA statements and our own policy, and we say, hey, we don't weed for problematic content, or weeding is not the tool that gets involved when there's problematic content. How would that affect what is actually happening in the library? Would there be a big change in terms of the trajectory? No. I think the answer is no. And if so, maybe this is an opportunity to reinforce that we're going to stand with those principles and just take away some of the ambiguity when we start talking about some content, some of the things we talked about today, even if it's a minor portion. So I don't know where to go with that. I guess I'll ask for a response or give the opportunity for a response from anyone. You know, what would be the next step there possibly? And then I have one other different question. Go ahead, maybe Wendy. Yeah.
I have a question for Mike because I'm getting, I just need some clarity. Are you asking for some kind of direction for for the policy revision that's coming up on this particular issue? Or is there something particular that you?
Well, so there's two things. So two things, and thank you for the opportunity to clarify. One, so I don't think we're looking at this, I don't think we have this on the calendar, anything to do with weeding or reconsideration. But if there is something that the staff were telling me, oh, we really need a tool to involve problematic content in the weeding process, then we would want to look at that, and would want the staff to bring that to our attention so that we could. That's not what I'm hearing today, but yes, if that's.
Okay, I just wondered where that came from.
Well, it's coming from, I feel like there may be a discrepancy between what the policy says and some small aspects of what we're actually doing, at least conceptually.
And that is from?
That is from people saying that we have a deselection policy, otherwise known as weeding, and we follow a principle that says weed books that reflect gender and racial bias. That's what I heard today that we're actually doing, but that's not part of that doesn't match our written policies or the ALA guidelines, as one example. So I'm just trying to, this is not an accusation, it's a, hey, I'm curious about a possible discrepancy. And what I think I'm also hearing, and I want to let the staff respond also, is that, hey, if we did take a more strict interpretation of, yeah, weeding doesn't include problematic content, would that change anything that we're doing or change the trajectory? I think I'm hearing no. And if we were able to kind of make that statement, we'd be able to stand on just a little more even firmer principle.
If I could say something, I think that certainly this seems like maybe something that the policy committee can look at and to talk about. If I were looking at this again and looking at our policy, the one thing that I would try to do is incorporate crew into our actual policy, because it's in the collection management plan, which is the main tool that staff have to rely on for here's how to deal with materials. And crew is the backbone of what, like most of that is adapted from crew, basically, which is a gold standard in the United States for how public libraries should handle all weeding and deselection. So I think it would be worth reviewing in order to try and make sure that the board understands what that tool is and that that's a board level, the board agrees that that's the tool we should use.
Right.
Right now it's in a procedure, not in a policy.
Okay.
Right.
So,
And also, there's a distinction, well, the weeding is under collection management. So in collection development, when you're hopefully the focus is not on getting rid of all of these things, but on providing, making those assessments of your collection, so to see how they do reflect diversity, and then researching and finding what else that you need. So I think that's just one part, Mike, and it maybe I'm seeing it wrong, but
no, I absolutely agree. There's a big picture in collection development and also in weeding itself, and I'm just focusing in one particular portion of that.
I agree with David that it should go, maybe the policy committee could take a look at this and consult with the experienced.
I think that the point has been made that this is something we need to look at.
Okay.
If we have time, I have one last question, which is it's a little bit different. So I saw so thank you for Angela for putting all that time into the diversity audit. I see the numbers that come out that say, 1% of this and 5% of that. How do we go about defining what the target would be of what we would want those numbers to end up as? And I have for example, religion, I was a little surprised that it was, while you're reading the book, it wasn't worth recording how many were Christian versus non-Christian, because that would have allowed us to identify what a ratio might be. But how do we, what principle would be involved in saying, well, it's 1.5% and our target is 7%. How would you get to that 7 number to identify?
It would be looking at demographics. What are our communities? And that there just aren't as many books published as the percentages for our demographics.
Yeah, there's an availability issue, I'm sure.
As far as those numbers on religion, Of those 594 books, those were the only books that were non-Christian. Everything else was Christian.
Well, I can't.
It may not
I look
have
at
dealt
594 books.
specifically with religion as a topic,
Mhm.
but the characters were Christian. Also, to point out, numbers don't all match exactly because animals don't count. If it was animals, it didn't feed into any of the numbers other than the 594.
Okay, so if you're saying there's, and I'm just making these numbers up, if there were 7% Muslim in our community and 45% people who identify as Christian, that's of, I mean, maybe I would, if I were trying to make a definition, I might say of books that have overt religious identification, that might be a ratio you would aim for. Is that what you're telling me as far as how you would come up with targets?
I am aiming for representation across the board and bringing back some more representation of marginalized communities. And the focus of the diversity audit is on books representing marginalized populations. And that's why Christianity is not one of the things that I'm counting, because that's our majority, that's our default.
Thank you.
Okay.
We really appreciated Haley and Angela. It was, a great presentation for us, and I'm sure it's going to prompt more discussions by the policy committee and also the rest of the board as we go along. So we may call you back for some consultation.
Thank you both. Thank you.
Guys for having us today too.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you all for
Thank
having us. Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to new business. And the first thing that we want to talk about is the board self-evaluation. I've been on the board for 5 years, and this has tended to be a fairly innocuous process every August to do a brief evaluation of the board and then to move on. But I think that we need to be a little bit more thoughtful about it this year. This kind of evaluation for a board is becoming widely recognized as being essential for good governance, for us all to be working together toward agreed upon goals. And in order to do that, I think we need to really be marching in the same direction as best we can, given our different perspectives on things, which I think are very useful for the board, but that we still have a commitment to the good governance we can provide for the library system. This has been a really taxing year. It has stressed everybody to the limits. I think it has put a lot of things on the back burner for a number of people. And the board participation may have been one of those. I think that may be reflected in some of the responses that we got on the survey. But I would like to start out this discussion by picking up a few points that specifically, I think, refer to the role of the president in these boards. Having looked through the comments and the grading of how the meetings are run and the sorts of processes that we use, I've come up with 3 points that I'm going to be working on for the rest of the year. The first one is trying to ensure that all board members feel free to contribute to the discussions that we have, either in committee work or in the board meetings. It appears that some people feel that their voices may not be welcome, and I think that that is a real failure on my part. Not making sure that people understand that every comment that people have is valuable in terms of how we conduct our business. The second thing is to make sure that everyone on the board feels confident that any dissenting opinions in issues that are under discussion are respectfully heard. I think that that is something that I've been taking for granted, that the rest of the board understands that any comment that's made will be heard with respect and acknowledgement that the comment is being made to try to help us move our board and our library system forward. But I'm not sure that that's true. So I will be having that in the top of my mind as we try to move forward in discussions from now on for the rest of the year. The third thing is ensuring that the board confines itself to discussions of policy, unless the director has specifically brought some procedural issues in front of the board for advice or consent. It's something that will be on the top of my mind as David and I work on the agendas for the meetings. So those are the three things that I'm pledging to you all that I will try to do for the rest of this year. But there are a lot of things that really fall on your shoulders in terms of how this board functions, whether it's at the committee level or in the board meetings. And I would really appreciate it if you all were able to give some thoughtful readings to the comments and the gradings that were made in that survey, and can let the board know your responses to those things. I don't know the easiest way for us to go through this. I would really like it if people do have things that came to their minds that they felt were important to bring into this discussion, if they would raise those issues. Wendy.
This is a generalized comment. When the same thing happened to last time when we did it, and I completely forgot about it, but some of the questions and the response 1 to 5 are inappropriate in terms of they really don't match. They ask you, you know, a question on a scale of 1 to 5 or whatever, and that wasn't I didn't feel that. I think, and we talked before about going back and amending it, and I think we did, but I would really appreciate having, you know, for the future, we could look at the questions again before we jump right into the survey. And without going through the survey again, I couldn't remember which of those particular items I thought needed revision, that's all.
There was one particular section where
Yeah.
the survey asked about problems. And it appeared to me that people were responding as if it were asking about positives, so that the scoring was inverse. But I think that that's relatively easy to interpret. If a group
That
of...
was one, but you noted that on there.
I did.
But there were several other cases where I thought, well, that's not enough. I need another.
Well,
Yeah, that's just me. So.
And there always are places for you to make comments, which weren't particularly widely used. And I realize that everyone's under time constraints, but I think the comments, frankly, are the most useful part of a survey like this. And so I would be happy if a couple of people on the board would like to sit down and work through a board self-evaluation survey that would more closely reflect what is important to be discussing on an annual basis. You can let me know if you have some volunteer time, and we can set up a committee to take a look at that survey. But in terms of the results of the survey, I think there were a number of points that probably we ought to be thinking about and discussing. I was a bit taken aback by the responses that were given to the question about your most important contribution to the board over the course of the year. We do a lot of important things. We review the director, we help establish the budget, we work through policy issues and procedural issues if we're requested to. We communicate with our jurisdictions to try to make sure that what the library system is doing is providing what the jurisdictions are seeking for the money that they give us. And we need to respond to our patrons. And I think that there was very little evidence of real interaction with either patrons or with members of the decision-making committees in our different jurisdictions. can I get some feedback on that? Are there ways that the board could facilitate those kinds of things to help board members be more interactive with either the patrons or the jurisdictions?
Well, just speaking personally here, with regard to the jurisdictions, I, as a still relatively new member here, feel like I want to be very careful not to speak for the board, especially not in a situation where we're speaking directly to the powers that be. So, while I know my district supervisor here in Scottsville, and in my work with the town, I have some interaction with her. To this point, I've not gone out of my way to intentionally bring up JMRL business, not sort of wanting to take an unofficial line on anything. So I think if that's something that you want us to reach out and do more of, some direction in the where and to what end would be helpful.
I think it might be better to frame this in terms of getting feedback from them, in terms of where we are meeting their expectations and where we might be, we might not be doing the things that they would think the library should be offering to the community, rather than lobbying, unless it's with regard to the budget, David, or really trying to influence any of the jurisdictional.
Sure. But that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, getting feedback, I think, is something that we also need to be seeking out from our patrons. And I didn't really see a lot of evidence of that. Perhaps you can tell me that that's not true.
I think I'm not understanding the explicit part here. I think I'm missing something. Are you saying that you feel like we as trustees are not connected sufficiently to library patrons in our community?
No, what I was saying was, it didn't seem to be the thing that people were recognizing, Lisa, as an important role for a board member. And that was what sort of jumped out at me from the comments.
I guess I thought, like, for example, just speaking for myself, like when my neighbor brought this concern to me about the child in the library, I responded to that. I talked to them, I talked to her, I talked to David first, of course, and that to me seemed like an organic way that someone in the community, I don't know, I just felt like, we get letters, we reply to them, or we forward them on. I'm not sure how to, I'm not saying it's not possible, I think it is possible, it is important, in short of maybe attending more in-person events. I guess I'm trying to understand more of what you see we are not doing.
Again, it's not that you're not doing it. It doesn't seem to be something that's on the top of everybody's mind in terms of what their role on the board is. And that was what jumped out at me. It wasn't the thing that people mentioned, with one exception, Lisa, and I think it was probably you.
So,
but I hope that we can start thinking about integrating understanding of community needs more with our role on the board. We're all individuals, we all have different perspectives on things, but I think that that's a primary thing that we can provide for the library system, and that's bringing together these issues that can be discussed as you brought issues to the board.
I'll mention, I think these sort of informal opportunities are very important, and I think Lisa's example was maybe along those lines. We have in the past had some formal opportunities with defined Ask a Trustee, hours.
Well, that's right.
And we, for whatever reason, got away from that. I mean, right now it's not it's not going to be an in-person interaction necessarily, but I'll just throw out that it's possible to kind of generate more formal, if we can come up with our own mechanisms to make that happen more. So maybe we could re-envision, well, what's a in the COVID era, what's an Ask a Trustee hours look like, but it can be both informal and formal. We have opportunities to kind of nudge that interaction a little bit as well.
That sounds great. That's
Yeah, good idea. I forgot about that other program.
exactly. And I think we all do get involved with the day-to-day nitty-gritty and just getting it off our desks in many ways. Not only library business, but other business that we have to deal with. And I think keeping on the top of our minds that one of our major roles, as far as the communities that have sent us to this board are concerned, is keeping in touch with what's going on in the community. Are there any other comments from people who saw things in the survey or in my summary that raised issues with you in terms of board participation? I was also a little distressed that that the board service didn't seem to be a source of enjoyment and pride and a feeling of accomplishment for a lot of people. That didn't come out through the results of the questions about that issue. And I think that's a problem if we're not feeling satisfaction from the work that we do on the board. I don't know the reasons for that. Can anybody who might have responded, since all of the responses were unidentified, can anybody respond to why it might be that a board member might not feel appreciated, might not feel that the work is really that valuable?
I think I might have been the guilty party for the answer there about respect, and it really had more to do with my reading of the question. To be honest, that's just not the sort of thing that I usually feel comfortable grading myself upon. I didn't really feel like it was for me to say. So I tried to answer that as neutrally as I could, not realizing I was creating a stir by that. No, certainly has nothing to do with a lack of pride, if I was the one there providing that answer. But yeah, I think in a review of the survey in the future, that type of question is the sort of thing that I might change to ask anonymously if we feel like our peers are getting out of this what they put into it or something along those lines. Anyway, something we can bring up later.
Okay. Again, I really appreciate it if people would be interested in working on this to make it a better survey.
Absolutely, absolutely.
One thing that helps too, I read what was put on about the survey. It would help because I'm sitting here trying to run through what you're saying. So it would help as we talk about the item to say number one, number two, number three, so that we can kind of follow, because as you grade yourself, you know, I did mine about 12:30 at night, and a lot of things that I thought about came to mind, but then after I submitted it, some other things came to mind. So it would help me a great deal next time when we do review this to go back and go point by point, because then I can say, oh yeah, I should have put that, or oh no, I'm not doing that, because a whole year goes by and you do things. I can remember going to my church and introducing the Festival of the Book and some of the things that we talked about. And because I am an educator and I educated kids in the middle who did not like school, who did not like parents, who did not like authority, this is one of the reasons why I came on the board, because I have always wanted to show them that reading is important. And Lisa, I'm a lot older. Betsy Barnes was my favorite person, and my mother stopped me from reading that. But you probably don't remember that because you probably weren't born. But we need to kind of look at it and then come back together as a group, just as Thomas mentioned. You know, a lot goes into this when you're evaluating yourself, and a lot can be left out because we don't always like to toot our own horn, and we don't always like to take responsibility for where we may have a shortcoming. So I would like to offer that suggestion.
One of the things that I thought about over the last couple of years is questioning whether a board retreat, especially because there's so many new members on the board over the last couple of years, might not be a good way for us to bring some of these issues out, discuss them in a safe environment, and really try to make the board better. If that's something that the board would be willing to consider, especially when we can get together face to face, I think that would really strengthen the bonds between trustees, help with all of the specific work that we do, but also give David a good platform from which to orient other board members as they begin coming on the board, and some of us are rotating off. Can I get some feedback? I mean, would people be willing to spend the time to do that?
I'll volunteer to go and host it in Hawaii, and you all join me virtually. I'll make sure you enjoy it. I'll have details.
Generous offer, Wendy.
The food.
Or perhaps we could go.
We talked about it before, and I think people were in agreement a lot, but now with the COVID, I guess we're gonna have to, well, gives us time to plan, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll point out with the remote meetings, we really have lost, and it's just a necessity, but we've lost the opportunity for the little water cooler conversations and connections, that might happen with other meetings. And so there's definitely trustees that I just haven't interacted with very much, just because the opportunity hasn't been there. So I do think that, one motivation for the type of thing you're describing, Marcy, could just be professional development, but I think the sort of just the personal connections and just that working relationship, those opportunities have been lost. And so it'd be great if there was a way to, facilitate that somehow a little better.
Well, if you can think of a way to do that virtually.
That's the trick. Yeah.
That's the trick. But perhaps what I'll do is talk with David and see if we can outline a plan for something in the spring that we might be able to do outside, so that even if we are still under constraints in terms of meeting face to face, we can do it in a safe place, and people can begin to sort of reestablish the connections that we had as a board when we were able to meet face to face. Are there any other issues that anyone would like to raise about how the board functions? You can be as critical of me as you would like to be, but I hope that you might have some constructive comments about how we might make this board function better. It's perfect, huh?
No, but I think we need time to digest.
Okay.
Yeah. And maybe we could bring the suggestions back next time and think a little bit about it, or do it through email, or with each other and with you. I feel like I just need to think about what you all just said. That is important. What Mike said, what you said.
I would appreciate it if anybody who has any feedback would contact me with that. We can talk on the phone, we can do it by email. And I will see if we can set up something that we can start looking forward to in the spring, where we can get together as board. We have budget meetings and going through working with the jurisdictions to make sure our budget comes through with as much support for the library system as we can muster. So I think the next 3 or 4 months are going to be really taken up with a lot of requests from David and from the budget committee for input and work on these budget issues. But once we get through that, hopefully we can then revisit this issue of how well the board functions and whether we can make it function any better. In that context, it would be helpful to me if each of you would send me to the JMRL email address, the trustee N email address, the way that you would prefer to be contacted if I need to get in touch with you. I've noticed that people on the board look with varying intervals at the JMRL emails, and yet I don't want to crowd all of your different communication boxes with duplicates of things that you're going to be seeing in other places. So if you could let me have a list of the ways you want to be contacted, I would really appreciate it. Thanks, and thanks for thinking through this over the next few months so that we can hopefully have some productive discussions in the spring. David, now we'll talk about the budget objectives that are beginning to come together for fiscal year 22.
Thank you, Marcy. And I'm not part of that board self-evaluation, but I will say I know how difficult this has been for all of you all with going 2 months without a board meeting and then shifting to virtually and trying to make very difficult decisions. I mean, the most important decisions you've had to make, any of you, during your tenure here. So I will say that the library staff greatly appreciates the time and energy and thought that you all put into this volunteer work, especially when it came to helping make decisions about the COVID response that JMRL has been going through. So that's my personal thanks. Okay, just a quick snapshot of where we are. We're beginning budget work right now. The timeline is that the Personnel Committee is meeting later this week to review managers' requests for changes in the operational budget. There were no surprises there. I mean, most managers, I think, have a pretty realistic view of what the budget picture is going to look like for our jurisdictions in the next few years. They will make recommendations based on that. I will be getting together with the heads of all 5 jurisdictions within the next, before October 15th, I think it's written into our regional agreement, or their representatives to talk about JMRL's budget prediction for next year and to hear about their own early indicators for their budgets. The 5-year plan has no fiscal commitment in it for next year, for fiscal year 22, except for the additional hours at Northside that were actually requested coming into fiscal year 21. So there's nothing new that we were expecting to add this year. There was a lot of work prepping for the next few years that we'll have to think about. And of course, there were cuts from the requests that were to meet 5-year plan goals this current year in the spring. So the current budget that we're operating under does not support the goals that we had in last year's budget for a 40-hour IT position, the new hours at Northside, and the Personnel Committee will discuss both of those next week to see whether or not they're viable moving forward. The administrative priority, so my priority is to secure cost of living raises for staff, which we did not get last year. So staff got no increase in pay last year and are doing more work than ever and under difficult circumstances. So ideally, this board would support those raises as their top objective. And then we're talking about maintaining current levels of service. We'll talk about Northside and the hours there, but my belief is probably that request won't come through for next year. It'll be coming up with a plan for the next few years to add those in. So I don't think that requires, Marcy, any action from the board, but it would be good to hear some consensus on or thoughts on the supporting raises for staff as the top priority that I am going to pursue administratively. Any questions?
Other than a nod, thanks, Lisa.
I'm nodding here as well.
Thanks, Thomas. Okay, I think you've got good support from the board, David. I think all of us understand how difficult this has been for staff. Not only not getting the raise for this year, but also the extra work that they've been doing.
And also, of course, the big driving factor in our personnel budget is always the cost in medical insurance and retirement that we won't get full numbers from from the city of Charlottesville probably until the very end of the year. So we'll start asking them for early guesses, but that's just what they are at this point.
Right. And we'll all have to see. I guess we're going into the season when all of us are going to be looking at changes in our health insurance and that sort of thing. Thank you. The next order of business is a Friends Liaison report. Wendy is not only serving on this board, but also serving on the Friends board. Unmute, Wendy.
Sorry. David's done a great job of keeping you informed, so I think you all are pretty much aware of what's been happening and what's going on, and we're just in that maintenance mode. But they've been doing this Sunday afternoon book bag sales. We're still looking for a warehouse type storage and potentially future, which we had started before the pandemic, looking for a house for the books and future book sales perhaps. So that's ongoing. They've got some leads. So hopefully next time, or two more times we meet, I'll be able to tell you what they've actually come through with. And I also, if you're interested, I don't really know how to put the budget up here, but if you're interested in the figures, obviously this is devastating and financially for the Friends and jointly for the library, because all of the, or a lot of the programs and all are funded by the Friends. So until we get back on track with the book sales, we have been talking about other ways of raising money and fundraising, and coming up with some other ideas to spur some monetary growth from the public for the Friends, and also just keeping their name out and about and encouraging any kind of publicity and information that we could get doing, so we can get those book sales ready to go again, I hope. But if there are any questions that you have or anything that you would like to suggest, I'd be happy to take some ideas back with me, so you can email me or have some creative ideas, or can end this any sooner, or you have somebody who has a warehouse who wants to give to us, that's also good.
I might reach out to you about that, Wendy.
Oh, okay.
That sounds good. Thanks, Wendy. It's nice to feel like we're in better touch with what's going on at the Friends right now, especially the difficult circumstances that they're dealing with. Now we go to old business, since we didn't have any active committee meetings yet, although we'll have a personnel committee meeting on Thursday afternoon at 3, virtual, correct, Carla? And David, you give us a review on the COVID-19 plan and how it's going.
Sure, thank you. So it won't be too long, but I do have some pictures to show you about the first week of Tier 3 service at Greene, Louisa, and Nelson. So if you'll recall, at the last board meeting, you all authorized me to work with our jurisdictions on a limited reopening on a per jurisdiction, per branch basis. So I worked with Greene, Louisa, and Nelson, who were all supportive. They all reviewed JMRL's Tier 3 appointment only plan. We also resubmitted it to the health department for review because it had changed over the summer as we were working on different scenarios. So those 3 branches opened last Monday for service. I got to visit all 3 during the week and have been in touch with their managers. It's really a testament to the staff at all 3 locations, to the managers, Ophelia Payne, Ginny Reese, and Susan Huffman, who prepared for this. They all, we had a manager's check-in this morning. They all said how gratifying it was to be able to serve the public again, and how their staff felt safe doing so. So it's going well, but I don't have a ton of data because it's only been 1 week. So just so you know, the next step moving forward will be to engage with Albemarle County to be talking about the exterior, so Scottsville and Crozet, to talk to Albemarle County about a timeline for a phased appointment only service there, kind of working in concentric circles to hopefully at some point get back into the Charlottesville urban area once we have a full picture of what this fall is going to look like. So if you don't mind, I'll share, I will share a few pictures. I promise this won't take too long, Marcy.
That's okay, David. I think a little joy in our lives is worth it.
I agree. Okay, so how do you make it go? My face is in the way of the, here we go. So steady business, no one has had to be turned away for service, which was one of the questions that the board had, whether we had to tell somebody, no, there's no time for you. They have had, each branch has reported having to make times that were not the first choice of an appointment. So somebody would ask for 10 o'clock on Tuesday and they were told, well, no, but 11 o'clock works, and they were able to do that. Let's see, let's look at some pictures. So here's green. They're entering on the side reading garden there, which is not normally an entrance to the library. The main entrance, of course, is the shared entrance to the building. And while Java is also offering programming there, we made the decision to offer service through the side garden there. So you can see the extensive level of signage that all of our locations have at this point. I'm not even going to attempt to read that sign. My eyes are not that good. But inside the building, Ginny and her staff have done a great job of marking out, you know, here's where to go to keep the flow of traffic moving in one way, to keep people from bouncing into each other. Asking people not to return books on the cart. Normally they might return them as they come in, but we want everything on the outside so that they can be quarantined all at once. The front door, of course, no library service, but please call for service so they can help people. Here's the meeting room. All of our meeting rooms look this way right now. For those of you who come in person, Northside next week, you'll see that Northside's looks the same way. So the green staff have repurposed this area from all the furniture that people can't use, also to workspace. There are 2 workspaces in here with computers, phones, so the person in the back can actually answer the phone while the people out front are helping the appointment service. Here's the other one. They make heavy use of our chat function within our email system to tell each other, like, here's somebody's coming in at this time, you know, I've put it in the document, things like that. This booth is closed for seating during tier 3. Lots of sad signs like that. Here's a happy sign. So most health organizations are saying that if you can get a flow of air from the outside coming into your building, it's one of the best things you can do to keep the air from being dangerous. So green is able to open some windows, which is not the case at most of our libraries. They really enjoyed that. Here we are in Louisa, same story. You can see the beautiful windows there open. They have a few tables out for the public that are, those are about 10 feet wide, but there's enough that for during appointment service, people would have an individual table. Here's their book drop. Books come in through the outside there, and they've moved a cart right over here to handle them and put them promptly into quarantine. Here's the quarantine items. They're behind caution tape. So unfortunately, the mine, which is a big hit out there, is a little bit right now behind caution tape. Here's Louise's meeting room, again, full of furniture, quite heavy furniture that the county generously moved for Ophelia. Here's their staff room, also full of furniture. Here's Ophelia showing that they have basically 2 separate services happening out of the front door here. Those tables actually extend all the way through to the front of the library. So they can do appointment service through one door, letting people in. They have to go through a checklist, confirm good health, things like that, verify that they're wearing a mask. The other side is for curbside pickup, so they can offer those simultaneously. Services by appointment only. Here's Nelson's curbside pickup, which is across the, currently it's across the parking lot, the front entry to the parking lot from the library itself. Here's your first view, well, almost. The way that Susan and her staff are handling it is asking people to remain in the car. Susan comes out and lifts up a sign that basically says one group at a time can come in now, and she goes through the appointment process with them. Julita Ellis moving a very heavy hand sanitizer unit to go back towards the new computer lab. I don't know if this gives you a sense of the scale of the inside of the library, but where Julita is standing is basically the end of the original library, and where I was taking the picture was the other end, and see how far back it goes. Here's Susan shelving. You see some patrons in the background. The biggest thing there is that they're having to tell everybody where everything is, because it's a brand new library space for everybody who comes in. Well, where are the mysteries? Where are the new books? Where are my holds? Things like that. Beautiful new furniture. Again, not available currently. I just really like these maps of Nelson County that Susan put up all throughout the computer lab in there. They're US Geographical Survey maps. So that's just, I thought it was neat. I also like the little emoji with the face mask on it. What a year 2020 has been. Okay, and those were my only pictures there. So I just a few things to note there. Anecdotally, I was very happy with how the remote desktop software that Josh and the IT staff set up was working, especially at Green, where the staff were able to help somebody who desperately needed to use the computer from afar. Basically, they were yelling across the room, and it was very smooth, and largely because Ginny and her staff had practiced, within the workforce there for quite a while. Nelson is seeing entire families book a slot, which would have been a dream to me as a child. It's just a library for your own family, for 5 people coming in there. The first week was a big success. As I said, anecdotally, staff were reporting feeling safe. We're going to evaluate capacity in the weeks to come, and then start talking about what we can do to provide more service. Any questions about how that first week went or what the plans are moving forward?
I actually walked into the library for this meeting today as a family was coming in, 3 children, 2 parents, all of them with big smiles I've ever seen. And they headed for the children's section and then for the adult section. So it was exciting for them.
Okay, that's all I have.
Thank you, David. All right, the last of the old business is a vote on the JMRL policy 1.4, Friends of the Library, that we discussed at the last meeting. Mike, do you have any comments about this? It's in your packet. The revised sections are in red. Does anyone have any comments about it at this point? May I have a motion then that we accept this policy revision?
So moved.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to go person by person in the way you're on my display, so it won't be any kind of order. Carla?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Kathy?
Yes.
Wendy? That was a yes? You're muted. Lisa?
Yes, yes,
Yes.
yes.
Thank you. Thomas?
Yes.
Tim?
Yes.
Erica?
Yes.
Thank you very much. We'll have a lot more policies to deal with as we get on into the year, but I know Mike's been working on that. There'll be a big policy committee meeting before the October meeting. So all of the board members are obviously welcome to sit in on these meetings so that we get some background on what's being discussed, if that's of any interest. Library director's report, David.
Okay, thank you. One thing I neglected to mention in the tier 3 work is that there is another hours change coming up that didn't make the last list of hours changes that I sent out to everybody. So not only were Green, Louisa, and Nelson moving to tier 3, but Crozet and Northside were adding additional hours. The Central Library is going to be adding Sunday hours starting this weekend. So now we will have service for 7 days a week in JMRL. So it'll be the normal 1 to 5 schedule. It's curbside only still, but Sunday hours will be available. So I'm very glad that the staff here have worked on that plan. Just to make you aware that 2 of the biggest vendors of our digital collection are merging. Overdrive has bought RB Digital. So I don't know that you would hear about this, but you might hear the folks that use the RB Digital app. It's now going to all move to the Libby app, which is the Overdrive service. So in some ways that's good. It'll be a streamlining. There'll just be one thing there. RB Digital was mostly audio book material, some also ebooks, but then also they are the platform for Zinio, the magazine reader. That's a little bit delayed. That's going to be behind the initial surge there. It was mentioned earlier today, the JMRL Staff In-Service Day is going to be all virtual on October 12th. The agenda is coming out this week. I will send it to you all as well. We're having a test session a week in advance for staff so that they can test their own material, their own login capabilities at home with their own devices and things like that. Also making those available in library for staff that need it. The last thing is that earlier in the spring, we talked about a McIntyre Group workroom to talk about a McIntyre Room work group rather. To talk about the naming of the McIntyre Room at the Central Library. This group met last week, and the long and short was they agreed to name the room at Central the Swanson Case Courtroom in honor of the historic event admitting the first African American to the University of Virginia. It was argued by Thurgood Marshall, Oliver Hill, and Spotswood Robinson. The case was the underpinning of Brown versus the board arguments. So I want to thank Carla and Kathy for participating in discussions from the board, and the Charlottesville native and library patron Maya Anderson for participating from the public, Siri Russell from the Albemarle County Office of Equity and Inclusion, and to the staff, Krista Farrell, the manager of Central, Abby Cox is a representative of the Equity Committee, and Josh Howard, who was strong-armed to join because of his doctorate in public history. So the group reviewed the history of the library system, the room, and the court case. We'll be seeking online feedback on that for a month, and then we'll review and make any changes necessary. Suggestions also included down the road seeking a state marker for the exterior of the building to commemorate the Swanson court case. And also, this came from Myra, a display on the third floor of Central giving a timeline and history of library service in the community, which couldn't be more timely because next year it's 100 years of service. So this would be a chance to reflect and tell the story of the McIntyre gift of the McIntyre building, and then to talk about the segregationist history that Lisa was referring to earlier of the organization, and then the move to become a regional library system in the in the 70s. So that was a great idea that came to light there, and staff will begin working on that right away. That's all I have to report.
Great idea.
Came from Myra Anderson.
Is there any feedback or progress on the film that is underway for the commemoration of the 100th anniversary?
Lorenzo has taken some footage both at the Louisa and Southwell libraries and is working his way around to the rest of the libraries in order to get footage and to find folks to talk to about this. So I wouldn't be surprised if in the months to come you're contacted by Lorenzo to try and get you maybe via Zoom on footage with some looking for sound bites for the film.
Okay, great. I think we'll all look forward to that.
Absolutely.
Are there any other matters that any board members would like to raise at this point?
Marcy, did you want to remind everybody that next Monday at 3 o'clock, there's a special session called?
Yes, that's written on my agenda, David.
Yes, sorry.
Next Monday at 3 o'clock. There will be a meeting. We will not be doing it by Zoom because of privacy concerns about that platform. And I hope that any of you who feel comfortable in a socially distanced, masked environment will come and actually meet in person to try to facilitate this discussion, make it as efficient and as useful to David as possible. Anyone who feels uncomfortable with coming in to meet with us in the Northside Library can call in by phone. There will be a setup and David will send out details in the course of the week. Good.
Great.
Future
Great.
agenda items, David?
I'm sorry?
Future agenda items.
As you mentioned, a report from the Personnel Committee from Carla next month and a report on the Policy Committee from Mike.
Good. Is there any possibility of restarting the continuing education? Are there any topics that you think would be useful, particularly going into the rest of this year?
Sure. I mean, we had a slew of ideas basically that were to be reported on, and I think that we've got a few that you might be interested in that are based on JMRL's response to COVID, like how did we adapt summer reading, how are we doing programming, things like that. So yes, certainly if the board is interested in restarting just every monthly continuing ed, staff can provide that.
I think it would be something that would be useful. And I know every single year when we do the board self-evaluation, there is concern by one or more board members about really understanding the underpinnings of how the budget is worked out each year. Since we're in budget season, it might be something that would be worthwhile sort of reviewing before we get into the nitty-gritty of that in November.
Okay. So is that a request for a CE about staff budget construction, basically?
I think it would be very useful.
Okay, great.
Does anyone else have any issues that they would like to bring onto the agenda for the next meeting? Good. Well, thank you all for this meeting. And I would propose that we adjourn at this point, unless there's any objection. All in favor?
Aye.
Excellent. Thank you all. And please don't forget to send me your preferred method of communication.